want to be upfront about something before I start. I am not the type of person who picks up on social cues quickly. My friends will tell you that. I give people the benefit of the doubt, past the point where most people would have already made a decision. I say that because I need you to understand that by the time I felt genuinely scared of Nora, every other person in that cabin had already been scared of her for at least 12 hours. I was the last one to get there, and I almost paid for it. The trip was planned back in October, 4 of us. A long weekend at a cabin up in the Catskills, the first week of December. Me, my best friend Joel, his girlfriend Priya, and my buddy from work, Carson. It was supposed to be the kind of trip where you do nothing, honestly. Drink, cook bad food, play cards, sleep too much. We rented a place that was about 40 minutes from the nearest town, up a road that turned to dirt after the first mile and a half. No neighbors visible from the property, the kind of quiet that's actually quiet. What changed was that Carson called me 2 weeks before the trip and said he was bringing someone. He'd started seeing a woman named Nora about 6 weeks earlier, and he wanted us to meet her and thought the trip would be a good setting. I told him it was fine. Joel had a longer reaction when I told him, something like a pause and then okay that communicated more than the word did. We all said it was fine though, because what else do you say? Carson and Nora arrived about an hour before the rest of us. When Joel, Priya, and I pulled up in Joel's truck, they were already inside, and Nora was standing at the window looking out. She didn't wave, she just watched us get out of the truck and grab our bags. Carson opened the door and hugged us all and introduced her. She was tall, very pale, with dark hair pulled straight back, and she shook each of our hands like it was post. A business meeting, not unfriendly exactly, just precise. Carson was doing the talking for both of them. She smiled when he looked at her, and when he looked away, the smile went somewhere else. The first evening was okay, mostly because Carson is one of those people who can carry a room by himself. He was excited and loud and kept the energy up, and Nora sat close to him and mostly listened. She answered questions directly when we asked them, but never added anything extra. Never asked us anything back. Priya tried the hardest. She has this way of making people feel at ease, good at conversation, genuinely curious about people. And even she came to me in the kitchen after dinner and said quietly, "She's strange, right?" I said I thought she was just shy. Priya looked at me the way people look at you when they've decided not to argue. That night we stayed up late playing cards, and Nora played too, and she was good at it, better than any of us, and she didn't gloat or react much when she won, just collected the cards and reshuffled. At one point she won 3 hands in a row, and Carson laughed and said something like, "She's ruthless, I'm telling you." She looked at him when he said it, and the way she looked at him made me think she was deciding something, not angry, just thinking. I told myself I was reading too much into a card game. We all went to bed around 1. The cabin had 3 bedrooms. Carson and Nora had the one at the far end of the hall. Mine was the middle room. Joel and Priya had the one closest to the main living area. I fell asleep fast, which is normal for me, especially in cold, dark places. I woke up sometime in the night, and I don't know why exactly. Not a sound, not a bad dream, just awake. My room had a gap under the door, and I could see that the hall light was on. I lay there for a second, and then I noticed the door was open. Not fully, maybe 4 inches. I was certain I'd closed it because I always close doors when I sleep. Every time, without thinking about it. I sat up and looked at it. Just an open door in a dark room, hall light behind it, nothing in the gap. I got up and went to close it, and when I got close enough, I could see into the hall, and Nora was standing at the far end of it, near the door to the room she shared with Carson, just standing there facing me. She was holding something at her side. I couldn't see what it was clearly. She didn't say anything for what felt like 10 seconds, and then she said, "Bathroom's back here if you need it." Flat voice. Not a whisper, not loud, just normal volume at 2 in the morning in a sleeping house. I said I was fine. She went into her room. I closed my door and stood against it for a while before I went back to bed. I told Joel in the morning while Carson and Nora were still sleeping. Joel got very still when I described it, the way he gets when he's processing something seriously. Then he told me that Priya had heard her moving around the cabin at around 3 the previous night, not the night before that, and hadn't said anything because she thought it was just someone getting water. He said Priya had not slept well since we got there and had said she felt like she was being watched in rooms that she was supposed to be alone in. I asked him what he meant and he said he didn't know exactly, just that Priya had used those words. Second day was fine on the surface. We hiked a trail that started at the back of the property, a couple miles out and back. Nora was a strong hiker, quiet the whole time, slightly ahead of the group. Carson kept up with her and the rest of us hung back. At one point Priya and I were walking together and she said, without looking at me, "I found something last night." I asked her what. She said she had gone into the kitchen for water around 2 and Nora's bag, one of those canvas tote bags she kept by the couch, had been knocked over or opened, and on the floor beside it was a fixed blade knife, not a folding knife, not a kitchen knife, a fixed blade knife in a leather sheath, the kind you'd wear on a belt. Priya said she had not touched it. She said she didn't mention it to Joel because she didn't want to ruin the trip. I told her we needed to tell Joel and she said she knew. We told him that afternoon when Carson and Nora went to bring more firewood from the stack outside. Joel's reaction was quiet. He asked Priya to describe it again, and she did, and then he was quiet for another moment and said, "Okay, tomorrow morning we're leaving. We'll say there's a family thing." We nodded. We didn't talk about it more than that. I want to be clear that none of us thought we knew for certain that anything was going to happen. It was just a knife that could have. A completely normal explanation, and a woman who was strange and unsettling and probably nothing. But the three of us agreed. Tomorrow morning, early. That night I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and listened to the cabin. I heard the fire settling. I heard the wind outside. At some point I heard footsteps in the hall, slow and without urgency, moving past my door. I watched the gap under the door. The hall light was off this time, but in the faint, ambient light, I could see shadow movement at the base of the door. Someone standing close to it. It stayed there for a while. No knock, no sound, just presence. And then it moved on, and I heard the sound of the living room, a chair or something, shifting slightly. I pulled up the group thread we had and typed, "She's in the living room right now. Everyone stay in your rooms." Joel responded 20 seconds later. Saw her, staying put. Leave at 6, not 8. I put the phone down and looked at the ceiling. I want to tell you I was calm, but I was not. My hands were doing that thing where they shake slightly and you keep trying to still them. Just before 5, I heard Carson's door open and then his voice, low and confused, asking Nora where she'd been. Her voice came back, very quiet. I couldn't hear the words. His voice again, a different tone now, and then quiet. At 5:30 I heard him in the hall, and I opened my door, and he looked at me with a face I didn't have a word for, and said, "We should go." I said okay. We were all packed and in Joel's truck by 6:15. Nora sat in Carson's car. Carson said almost nothing on the way out. Where the dirt road met the paved one, he pulled over and came to Joel's window and said, "I'm sorry about the trip. She's not well." That was all he said. He got back in his car, and they went the other direction. We didn't hear from him for 3 weeks. When he finally texted me, he said they weren't together anymore, that she'd left without telling him, and that he couldn't reach her. He said she'd given him a fake last name. He'd been dating someone for 6 weeks whose real last name he did not know. He said the police weren't very interested. She hadn't done anything they could point to. The knife was gone by the time we were loading up. Priya noticed that. She didn't say it out loud until we were an hour down the highway, and then she said, "It just once," and nobody answered her, and we drove the rest of the way home without music. I will tell you exactly what I saw, and I will not add anything to it, because I don't need to. What happened on that Thursday night in November at a rented cabin in northern Minnesota was already enough. Without me making it bigger, I've told this story 3 times total. Once to the police, once to my sister, and once to a friend who asked. Each time it comes out a little flatter than the experience was, which I think means it's not something that translates cleanly into language. But I'll try again. I went up alone. That needs context. I had gone through a separation earlier that year, and by November I was functional but hollowed out in the way that happens when something big collapses and you're still moving through the routines. A friend of mine had used this cabin in October and said it was the most alone he'd ever felt, and that he meant it as a compliment. Remote enough that your phone stopped doing most things. A lake out front, a wood stove, a truck in the driveway you could use if you needed to go into town. He sent me the booking information and I went the following month. No one else. 4 nights. The drive up was fine. The cabin was fine. Small. A single main room with a kitchen at one end and a living area at the other. 1 bedroom off the back. A small bathroom. Big windows facing the lake, which was mostly frozen already by then. Just the center still open water. It was exactly what I needed, which was very little happening. I got there on a Tuesday, settled in, and spent Wednesday reading and walking. The shoreline and cooking simple things and sleeping early. That day was good. That day was close to what I was looking for. Thursday is the part that matters. I spent the afternoon chopping wood that was already stacked but needed splitting, which is one of those physical tasks that takes up the right amount of mind. I made dinner early, ate at the kitchen table, looking out at the lake, which was going grey and dim. By 6, it was dark and cold, and I had the wood stove going, and I settled on the couch with a book. The windows were black mirrors by then. That's the thing about cabins at night with lights on inside. You can see your own reflection, but you can't see anything outside. I mention that because it's relevant. I read until about 9. I got up to put a log on the fire, and while I was crouched in front of the stove, I had the feeling, which I know sounds like the beginning of something exaggerated, but I'm trying to tell you it was real. I had a feeling of being in a room that had become bigger than I thought it was, like the space behind me had expanded. I turned around and looked at the room, and it was exactly the same, and there was nothing there. I stood up and went to the kitchen and got some water and went back to the couch. At 10, I turned off the reading lamp to go to bed, and the room went dark and the windows stopped being mirrors. I was walking toward the bedroom when I looked at the big window facing the lake and stopped. There was a shape outside, on the other side of the glass, maybe 2 feet back from it, facing the cabin. The shape of a person, standing without moving. I stood in the middle of the room and looked at it, and it looked back at me, and neither of us moved for what I can only estimate. It was about 15 seconds. Then I turned the lamp back on, and the window became a mirror again, and I couldn't see outside anymore. I want to tell you that I immediately called someone, or grabbed something, or moved. I didn't. I stood next to the couch with the lamp on for probably 2 minutes, trying to decide if I had seen what I thought I'd seen. I told myself it could have been a tree, or a post, or my own reflection behaving strangely on a dark and tired night. I told myself several things that I did not fully believe. Then I turned the lamp off again. He was closer, right at the glass now, face almost against it, and the face was looking directly at me, and I could see enough detail to know it was a man, and that he was wearing what looked like a collared shirt or jacket, and that his expression was completely and utterly flat. No aggression, no fear, just looking, like he was watching something that he found mildly interesting. I turned the lamp on again and grabbed my phone and called 911. I told them what I was seeing, and they told me to stay inside and lock the doors, and that they'd send someone, and that the closest car was about 35 minutes out. I locked the front door, I locked the back. I stood in the center of the kitchen holding my phone, and I did not turn the lights off again. I could not hear anything outside. No footsteps, no movement, no attempt on the door, nothing. The stove was the only sound. 20 minutes passed. I had almost talked myself into thinking he had walked away when I heard it. Tapping on the window, light, unhurried, 3 times, like knocking on someone's door, that same tempo, but on glass. I did not go to the window. I stood in the kitchen and watched it from across the room. The tapping came again, same rhythm, 3, and then from outside, not loud, not close to yelling, conversational volume, he said my name. My full first name, not my last name, not a question, just my name, the way you'd say it if you were telling someone to pay attention. I called 911 again and told them, and they said the car was 12 minutes away and to stay on the line. I stayed. on the line. I sat on the kitchen floor, with my back against the cabinet and the phone at my ear, and I listened for 45 seconds while the dispatcher talked to me, and then the tapping came again. This time from the back window, the bedroom window, which meant he had moved around the cabin without my hearing him. Same rhythm. The police car arrived in 8 minutes, not 12, and I heard the tires on the road before I saw the lights, and I stood up. When the officer came to the door, I had the lamp on and every other light on that I could find. He looked around the cabin, went outside with a flashlight, and came back and said there was nobody out there. He asked me to describe the man, and I did. He wrote it down without much reaction. He said there were sometimes hunters that came through properties they didn't have access to, and that it was more common up here than people expected. He said it like he was reading from something. He didn't say it like he believed it was a hunter. I asked him how the man knew my name, and the officer looked at the notebook and then back at me and said, "Sometimes they know more than they should." That was the whole answer. He didn't expand on it. He asked if I wanted an escort to a motel in town, and I said yes. He waited while I packed a bag. In the morning, I drove back to get the rest of my things before the booking ended. I went in daylight, quick. I was walking to the car with my last bag when I noticed the truck, the one that came with the rental. Both rear tires were flat, not from road damage. The valve stems had been removed, both of them, cleanly, deliberately, which takes a specific tool in about 40 seconds per tire to do properly. The truck had been parked there since Tuesday. It had been disabled before Thursday night, before he knocked, before he said my name. I called the rental company and they arranged a tow. I did not call the police again. I drove home in my own car, and I did not stop until I was out of that county. I've thought a lot about the order of events since then. The tires first and then the visit, and what it means that one happened before the other. A person who disables your transport before they knock on your window at night is not a person who showed up accidentally. Whatever he was there for, he had planned not to let me leave first. He didn't know the tires wouldn't matter. He didn't. No, I wasn't going to answer the door. I don't know what would have happened if I had. I'll be honest about how I felt about my father. We were not close, hadn't been for about 11 years when he died. And when the lawyer called me in February to tell me I had inherited a property in the Adirondacks, I felt mostly inconvenienced. There was no grief that surprised me. There was just a cabin that needed to be cleared out and listed, and I was the only person left to do it. My father had no other family who was speaking to him. That was mostly his own doing and not something I had the energy to be sad about anymore. I drove up in March, a Saturday, 6 hours from where I live now. The cabin was on a dirt road off a county route, surrounded by pine and birch, a small creek that ran behind the property. It was not unattractive. My father had decent taste in landscape, if not in most other things. The cabin itself was older, probably 70s construction. 1 story, 2 small bedrooms, a main room that held the kitchen and sitting area together, a narrow bathroom. It had been winterized, but not well. The pipes were fine, but the place smelled like cold and old wood and something else I couldn't name right away. I had a list of things to do: photograph everything, box anything worth keeping, trash the rest, meet with a local realtor on Monday who would handle the listing. 2 nights, 2.5 days. I had stayed in worse places for longer for less reason. I told myself it was just a job. The first thing I noticed was the food. The kitchen had canned goods on the shelves, normal enough for a cabin, but they were arranged very neatly, and there was more than you'd need for occasional weekend visits. There were probably 40 cans. There was a box of crackers that was open and only partially finished, and the open end had been folded down carefully to keep them fresh. There was a plastic container in one of the lower cabinets with a tight lid that when I opened it had rice in it, probably 2 pounds of dry rice. My father, to my knowledge, was not a survivalist or a prepper. He was a man who liked whiskey and solitude and did not think very far ahead. The organized food struck me as inconsistent with everything I remembered about him. I started photographing the main room and worked my way around it. Nothing else unusual. His furniture was old, but not wrecked. He had books, mostly history, and some fishing guides. A pair of reading glasses on the table beside the couch. A flannel jacket on the hook by the door that still had the shape of his shoulders in it in a way that made me stop looking at it. I worked through the afternoon and got the main room and one bedroom documented and partially cleared before it got dark. I made myself dinner from things I'd brought and sat at the kitchen table and did not think too specifically about anything. I went to bed in the second bedroom, the one my father apparently had not been using, and I slept well enough. The cold had retreated once I got the baseboard heaters going, and by morning it was almost comfortable. Sunday was when it changed. I started on the second bedroom, my father's, and that took most of the morning. He had very little that felt worth keeping. Some photographs, a few of me as a child that I didn't know he still had, which I put in the box without looking at them again. By noon I was down to the bathroom and the storage areas. A whole closet and a narrow door in the back of the main room that led to a storage space under the sloped section of the roof. I'd noticed the door on Saturday and assumed it was a utility space. I opened it Sunday, just after noon. The space was low. You'd have to crouch to get more than 3 feet in, and it ran maybe 12 feet along the back of the cabin. I put my head in and waited for my eyes to adjust. There was a sleeping bag, rolled but not stuffed in its bag, just loosely wrapped and sitting on the floor of the space. There was a backpack, a military-style one, zipped closed. There was a water bottle, the reusable kind, sitting upright next to the backpack, and there was a small battery-powered lantern. I stood outside the storage door for a while trying to decide if this was something my father had put there. It didn't feel like it. The sleeping bag was not old, the water bottle looked recent, and there was a specific quality to the arrangement. Everything given a place, everything stable, that did not match the rest of the cabin. I took pictures, and then I very slowly reached in and moved the water bottle. It was about a third full. If it had been sitting there unused since November or whenever my father died, the water would have been more stagnant than it was. It was not perfectly fresh, but it was not months old either. I put it back. I walked through the cabin differently after that. I opened every cabinet. I looked at the bathroom more carefully. There was a hand towel on the rack that was damp, not wet, but not fully dry. The bar of soap in the shower had been used recently enough that it still had the soft edges of recent use, rather than the dried, cracked surface of soap that has been sitting for months. I touched it, and it was slightly tacky. I stood in the bathroom and looked at these two things, and I thought about the food in the kitchen, the organized, careful food, and I thought about the sleeping bag and the water bottle. And I thought about the fact that I had slept in this cabin last night. I did not panic. I want to say that and also say that it wasn't because I was being brave. It was because my brain was moving slowly through the information and hadn't arrived at the conclusion yet. I went to the main room and sat on the couch and thought carefully. Someone had been using this cabin. They had a sleeping bag in the storage space, and they had been eating the food in the kitchen and using the bathroom recently. The question was whether they had been here before I arrived, or whether they were here now. I listened to the cabin, wind outside, baseboard heaters, nothing else. I looked at the storage door across the room, which I had left slightly open. I looked at it for a while, and then I saw it, just at the base of the door, in the gap, a very slight and regular movement, so small you could tell yourself it was a draft, moving the door on its hinges in some imperceptible way, but it was rhythmic and it was soft, and after I had been watching it for about 30 seconds, I understood that what I was seeing was the bottom of the door moving in and out by a fraction of a centimeter with each breath of whoever was lying on the other side of it. I stood up without making a sound. I picked up my car keys from the table and my phone and my jacket from the hook by the front door. I did not take anything else. I opened the front door and walked to my car and got in and drove down the dirt road to the county route and then drove until I had phone service and called the police. I described what I'd found and what I'd seen, and they sent someone out. They called me an hour later and said they had found evidence someone had been staying there, but no one was present when they arrived. They said it appeared to be a transient, someone who had found an unoccupied property and used it for shelter over the winter. They said it happened more than people expected with remote cabins. The realtor sold the property in May without me. Returning to it, I had given authorization to a local company to clear the remaining contents. They sent me a photo inventory before disposal, and in one of the photos, a shot of the main room, I noticed something I hadn't seen when I was there. On the shelf above my father's books, between two of the fishing guides, there was a photograph, small, sitting upright against the spine of a book. I requested a better photo of it, and when they sent it, I held my phone close and looked at it for a long time. It was a photograph of the inside of the cabin, the main room, the couch I had sat on, taken from the angle of the storage door, looking into the room at roughly the height of someone lying on the ground with their face at floor level. I don't know when it was taken. I don't know if it was taken while I was there or before I arrived. I don't know if my father knew someone was living in his cabin, or what arrangement, if any, existed between them. I sold the photo with the rest of the contents because I didn't want it, and I didn't want to think about what it was. But I've thought about it since, more than I'd like to, about what it means to take a photograph of a room and then leave it in that room, about who you'd need to be to do that, and what you'd be trying to say.